So first up on our agenda, do we have any new faces today? I wasn't here last week. I'm assuming, were you here last week, David? Or is this your first week joining us?
Hey, Emily. No, I was here last week, but hello, Emily. Nice to meet you.
Ah, it's nice to meet you too. All right. New face to me. Everyone else has already said hi to David. David works for VMware in sort of open source project management. He's going to be helping us out. Okay, moving on to outstanding RFCs. We got a whole lineup today. Let me share my screen. All right, starting with the oldest, but skipping the blocked one, moving on to the source removal build pack. I finally got around to doing some reviews I was delinquent on and had at least one question here for us, which is, you're mentioning that one of the goals here would be for build packs in a group together to be able to use one build pack to use this other build pack to delete files. And I have some concerns that the mechanism proposed here wouldn't work for that. So you can't, as a build pack, if a user sets an environment variable, an upstream build pack can't modify it, although that might be surprising. It is true in the lifecycle implementation right now. And that is like a detail, but I think it ties into, for me, a bigger concern, which is some decisions in the interface here make a lot of sense if a user is opting into including this build pack and trying to drive it that way, but I'd quibble about them or want to make different decisions if we're planning on adding this to all the meta build packs. That makes sense.
Yeah, so I threw a quick response in the bottom. I don't know that the exact intention of this build pack was for the build pack itself to have other build packs contribute what should be removed, included, or excluded. I think that was a potential hope, but if you're saying that lifecycle implementation doesn't let you do that, then
at least not reusing the same environment variable that a user might use, right? You can't get both of those inputs through that environment variable.
Then which is fair enough. I think then even still, I would probably, like as a Go maintainer, we currently have a set of logic, and I'd probably add it to something like the Go meta build pack groups, because it would enable a lot more sort of control that we have currently. And the way that we have it is that once we build, we kind of just delete everything out of the workspace anyway, and we build all of our binaries into a separate layer. So it's kind of not a big deal if we delete everything at the end, and the build pack doesn't really need to contribute much because it's kind of moved everything that it's deemed important somewhere else. So in that case, we might put it at the end so that we can replace individual logic that we have in there. But I think moreover, there have been people requesting the ability to remove things from their workspace once they have done builds for sort of bespoke configuration. So we've seen this request in people that are using Angular to build out like a transpile everything into static JavaScript, and then they want to run it using pick a server, and then they want to delete all of their unused source because it's just bloating out their image at that point, or delete unused modules or something to that effect. And so we had a couple of people come in and asking for it in that respect, and so we've pointed them to this build pack, but that doesn't feel great because it's a build pack that's just kind of I build by hand and then attach to a release, and then people have to download. So having a better pipeline for that would be preferable.
If it's common enough in some of those cases, we want to put it in the meta build pack.
We absolutely could put it in the meta build pack there as well. I think I didn't want to mandate this as like, oh, this is a utility that every build pack should add, because I think that some meta build pack families are just not going to get the same utility out of this as others. Like I wouldn't put this in like a non-compiled language family build pack, because that just seems like it's going to do more harm than good at the end of the day. But having an approved build pack that provides this kind of logic allows people to sort of clean up the error image to the way that they like, which from what I understand is like one of the bigger pieces of feedback that we receive, which is, why is there X bloat in my image? Well, if you think that that's bloat, then here's a build pack, tack it on, and then go wild, removing whatever you want from the image, is kind of, I think, the response that you could give. And if you have that in approved space, then
Yeah.
all the better.
I'm on board with that whole plan. Just trying to like sort of draw out some of these use cases, because it might lead me to quibble about things like, what does it do by default? Like right now, by default, it deletes everything. So sort of like the way you opt in is by including it in the order. If we imagine that it's common enough that enough people want to do it, that we'd want it in the order by default, but by default, it does nothing. Kind of, you have to opt in. Like, I think there's different, depending on how common it is, and even if we don't want to commit to using it in some of these ways right now, like if we could foresee using it in those ways, might change how we approach this.
I think as well, it also depends on like what context you're using this in, right? If you're using it in a pack versus like say K-Pack instance, where I can be a lot more loose about the custom builders that I have in a K-Pack setting and that sort of thing, it allows, I understand what you're saying. I think I built this specifically for a use case that I had in the Go build pack, and surveying other build packs, I either didn't see the need to have this kind of removal. Like I wouldn't want anything removed because I would want the user to completely be asking for it, or yeah, there's somewhere in between. I think that in maybe as a middle ground, Dan and I have talked about potentially exposing this build pack as a library as well. So having the logic be something that can be imported into other build packs, but also having the build pack itself be something that could be added to group orders. So you kind of can get the best out of it, but we haven't committed to that part of the API because didn't necessarily see it necessary to make the build pack part of the Paketo project.
Yeah, and like maybe we can take this offline to get into the details, but I'm like happy to approve this with the one caveat being sort of the default behavior being deleting everything, because I think that makes it like maybe too specific to the Go situation, or like hard to use in other places. Most other places I wouldn't want that to be the default,
But for sure, I guess then my question would be, do we want to just, then it comes down to whether or not you include it as a default build pack. So I guess that we can have that conversation offline, whether or not it should be a build pack that's built to be added to all of the order groupings, or if it should be a build pack that should be added to specific order groupings based on the specifics of the language. I think that's what it's coming down to, at least from what I can understand of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I'm more
a
than happy
good
to.
summary of
Yep.
the sticking point.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to hash that out with you through some comments back and forth.
All right. That's the only thing outstanding here. Just looking like a very useful thing otherwise, that we're quibbling about which cases it's defaulted for. Moving on to secure runtime environments. Sam.
I added the implementation section. If you want, I can walk people through it. But the idea is that we start out by creating an equivalent set of stacks and empty builders that have different user IDs, and slowly introduce a parallel test pipeline for each build pack that runs that same build pack, but on these new stack IDs. This would obviously also involve all of the build pack stack IDs being updated to support this new, whatever stack ID we decide for these different stacks. And then this optional build pipeline can be run, and this will allow us to have two things. One, get an idea of the compliance of existing build packs, and in the future, if you're adding new functionality to a build pack that's already compliant, we'll be aware that, okay, this thing is a breaking change for like this specific RFC, and we can potentially discuss that, how to deal with that in that specific pull request, but it will at least give us an idea of what build packs are currently compliant, and then if they are compliant at any point, if we are adding new functionality, are they becoming non-compliant with this RFC? I included the link that you pasted in the RFC on how to do this via Docker. But even if we don't go through the whole setting the read-only flag on Docker, even if we set the different users should still get a read-only system for the runtime user for the application image. Once we have that, then we have like a few generic cases where we might be non-compliant. I've tried to list some of them out, but from past experience, but this is obviously not a complete list. So the obvious candidates are any profile exec scripts and checking what logic they execute, because they're provided by the build packs, and if they're making any modifications, those should be easy fixes. The more difficult ones are like configuration files or other things where we don't explicitly own a binary that is creating these files during runtime, but it's some other thing we install, like some application writing log files or something, downloading something or creating cache files. And then if we control the configuration files for such applications, can we set some sane defaults, which will point them to appropriate locations for ephemeral files, things like log files, etc. Or alternatively, the user's home directory is another pattern I've seen, like where, since this is the runtime user, you can assume that the user can write in their home directory if it exists. Lastly, I've mentioned that we should be able to provide a utility build pack that supports paths that users want to make group writable or like writable during runtime. So you can provide a list of paths in the git ignore pattern and say that I want all of these paths to be writable. That we can include either in the final meta build pack once these builders are made public, or we can just provide that as a one-off for now. Once all the build packs that we provide comply, we can then think about releasing the set of builders with all the appropriate build pack groupings to the Paketo users with some support definitions or whatever and SLA. And at some point we can deprecate the current less secure builders if that's the direction we want to go in. So that's the current plan I've outlined. I am not quite sure about the last 2 points. That'll depend more on how the Paketo users and team feels, but at least this will introduce, like, for build packs that don't need to write things and we can change their behavior without breaking users, we should at least try to aim for that.
That all makes sense to me. I feel like there's 2 levels at which we can do this, right? Like the group write permission gives us some way to circumvent this, but that relying on that could still break in environments where people are running the root file system read only, which, like, I've definitely seen those environments in the wild, so I don't think it's just a total edge case. So in my mind, like, I think this is a good first step to make it work with the 2 different users. But after that, I think we probably need an additional step that's like, at the very least, you should be able to configure all of these things such that if your file system was mounted read-only, there's a way to make it run correctly.
I think for people who are running this in hardened environments, they'll probably want to be able to set the app config files to something that they know they can write to. So I'm less
Yeah.
concerned about those things than I am about like Buildpacks that currently allow or like currently rely on certain folders or directories being writable, and then suddenly now they cannot write to them. So like we want a state where the Buildpacks that we have right now run as they want, but we're not opening up the entire file system for modifications. We are very precise and surgical about the locations that we want to write into, rather than just saying like everything that the Buildpack put in is now open for writes. Like I don't want anything to modify my like interpreters or like JVM or anything. I can't think of a single like place where you want to dynamically modify or change anything where any of the folders where your JVM or your Python interpreter or your Ruby interpreter.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
so those things should definitely not be writable. So that's sort of what I'm getting at, that currently this is a huge open hole in how Buildpacks are implemented, where like with Docker, you can switch users, install things, and then switch back to a different user so that like those files are frozen and you can't modify them. I think up until now, like up until the upstream RFC, that was not possible in Buildpacks, but now it is, and we should take advantage of it.
So that makes sense to me. I know I was one of the people requesting more details here, but I was not the only one. Does everyone who left comments talking about the process here feel like have anything you want to discuss now, or is it just like we should all re-review and give it a check? Not hearing any objections, so it sounds like everyone just needs to read through the new changes. Thanks for making those updates, Sam. It looks really good. Back to our list of runtimes, a proposal to alter the builder order. I know Dan updated this with the results from trying it out with the full builder, which I think was the one outstanding request.
Yeah, last week we had one more that was to check with the Spring team and see, because there was some specific things that that we were doing with a particular tag on the builder to support one of the older versions of Spring Boot. And I did follow up on that, and everything should be okay. So if we cut a minor release, shouldn't impact them. So I think we're all set.
Cool. Is this a builder RFC, or I think it's a top level RFC, right?
Yeah, I submitted it to top level because I wanted to make sure everyone was visible, had visibility, since it could impact, well, could have, we don't believe it will impact other language families.
So I think we're just waiting for Ryan's review on this then.
I don't have an objection. I just was withholding until we got answers.
Sounds good. This is a subteam specific RFC for web server 0 config Buildpacks.
Yeah, I think this is still in the same state as it was last week, which is I need to go and like enumerate what the configuration would look like for I think there's like 4 use cases that Dan has outlined. I just haven't found time to do that yet.
All right, sounds good. Sounds like there's nothing new to discuss there. Moving on to Open Liberty Buildpack. I think this has all the required approvals. Looks like.
Yeah, I think we are mostly set here. There is one other RFC that Kevin submitted that I think we want to do before we merge this one, or at least before we implement this one. I could probably go ahead and just merge it.
Yeah, I have like one meta question here, but it's not something we need to hold up this on, but it's more like how we go about modifying decisions we've made in other RFCs. I think to a certain extent, we've copied the CMB model, or like the RFCs are kind of like a transaction log where every new decision we make a new RFC, which is easy for us in a lot of ways, but it's not the most helpful if someone's like reading through and trying to figure out what the state of the world is. I don't want to change that here. Like if we want to add an RFC that's like, we're going to change a decision we made earlier, we can go ahead and do that because we don't have a different process. But I think in the long term, it might be nice to have a way where we can sort of approve an amendment to an existing RFC in place rather than adding a new RFC. I don't know how people feel about that.
I think we have an amending system where you note what RFC you're amending with a newer RFC. I believe this is done with the move from Buildpack YAML to build plan to environment variables. There was a state where we kind of shifted through a couple. And I think that the latest environment variable ones has an amendment tag on it.
So is it a new RFC that's describing a diff from our previous one, or is it like a copy of the old one with one thing changed?
It's a new RFC within a link to the amendment. But if that's no good because it's hard to track down and you have a web of links, that's also fair.
I think we should follow our existing process for now, but I'm just like throwing out there to see if there's an appetite to change the process to like actually change RFCs in place, like with a note describing the change, so that someone coming in who's trying to understand the state of, Open Liberty Buildpack can just read one document describing its plan rather than 3.
Yeah, so you're suggesting like you could just open a PR that only changes, some set of the existing RFC.
Yeah. And then maybe like put some note at the top, be like on this date. Well, probably not the date because you always get the date wrong in the merging, but like we're changing X because of X reason. Noted that this is different than the old version. And if you want to see the old version, there's always history, right?
Yeah, I know. I think that would be good. I think a similar thing that has come up is like sometimes the implementation details change slightly during the implementation, or for whatever reasons, and being able to like update that would help create some kind of consistent documentation. So when someone comes back and reads it, they're not like, why is this different?
Like on the one hand, you could say like our documentations are documentation and our RFCs aren't, but I think it's pretty natural for people to want to use the RFCs that way if they stumble upon them.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily get the why of why something was implemented in the docs either. It's more like, how do you use it? And I think the RFCs have a nice explanation of the thought process that went into it. And so if that thought process changes for whatever reason, it'd be nice to have that reflected in the RFC.
Sorry to derail us with that. Is there anything you want to talk about on this particular Open Liberty PR while we're have it open?
I will go ahead and merge it and then just hold off implementing until we get to the other one that we'll talk about in a minute.
Okay, promote the Git build pack. Looks like this has all the reviews it needs as well. Am I reading that correctly? This is a utilities build pack.
I believe so. The only thing that I would say is that this doesn't have 2 of the bullet points, which is, it doesn't currently have any samples in the samples repo, and it doesn't have any documentation in the README of the build pack. I'm fine with merging it and just opening up some issues and a top level issue to do this and checking that off and then moving it once everything has been checked off in the top level issue.
I remember we had this conversation before and I can't remember which way it ended, which is like, can we merge the RFC with the intention to do these things, or do we wait till they're done before we merge it?
I think mostly what I cared about was like, no matter what, when it gets transferred to the top level org, that stuff is just already done. And we don't have this like long period where it's in the org, but it doesn't have samples and it doesn't have documentation. So whether that happens before we approve the RFC, that's fine. Or after, that's also fine. Just that we wouldn't move the repository until those things are done.
That makes sense. Maybe we can approve the RFC, then add them and then move it. Because I think there's some danger if you say move it first. It's like, oh, what if it gets rejected? We don't want the build pack, you know?
Okay, so we're merging this, opening issues, and before the actual migration happens, all of those the two missing requirements need to be at the forefront, and then we're good. We're present, I guess. Yeah.
Yep, I'm comfortable with that. Great. Image retention policy.
So I added this one partly out of a discussion that we had about migrating from GCR, where we used to write images, to Docker, where we're writing images for the future. Basically, that at the moment we have images going back to the beginning of Paketo history, and many of those images are probably unusable at this point. And a lot of them should never be used because of security vulnerabilities. So the idea is to come up with some sort of reasonable image retention policy that allows us to safely cut and delete old images after some specific criteria are met. The RFC proposes a date-based criteria, but I'm certainly open to hearing thoughts on other potential criteria.
Is it technically possible to do a usage-based on top of date-based? I say, like, don't delete anything that's under a year old, but then after that, like, only delete things that no one's pulled in so long. But I don't know actually whether that's exposed in a way that we could implement it easily.
Yeah, by default, I don't think GCR has any metrics. You have to, from what I was looking at it, you have to enable like a bucket and write access logs there, and then you'd have to go through the access logs and parse them and see. So I think technically you could, but it certainly isn't like as easy as query some API and get the result.
We move everything to Docker Hub, which I think was something we approved at some point, although we have stuff in both places, I guess, for, you know, historical not breaking things. Is it as important to have a retention policy, given that we don't actually pay for storage in Docker Hub in the same way?
I mean, I think there is like that if money is no object, it obviously makes it a little bit easier to just be like, you know, like whatever, don't care about it. But there is still something to be said for the like retention of things that are knowingly broken, or knowingly having security vulnerabilities.
I think the original conversation that kicked maybe this whole RFC off was that we were trying to close the loop on the Docker Hub transition. The issue we have is that we have images that exist on GCR that don't exist on Docker Hub. So there is this possibility that some users out there are using images that are on GCR that if we drop support and say like went in and deleted the registry in order to just kind of garbage collect things, we would be putting users in a space where they would have lost access to stuff they were depending on. Or alternatively, are we expected to go and like backport all of the historical images into Docker Hub, even though like from a security standpoint, we probably should be encouraging users to use like newer versions of things.
Definitely see the practical argument there. And on some level, you know, we're supposed to be encouraging people to use newer versions of things from a security standpoint, but I don't feel like that is so different from other pieces of software that have CVEs, where, you know, the old releases still exist out there that you could download or scan or do what you want with them. Like, I don't think we have to pull them from the universe as long as it's documented, you know, in what versions the CVEs are fixed, and people know that. You know, I think everybody knows that if you're many versions behind, you're likely to be vulnerable, right?
think it's also the opposite, right? If you pull an older version and you're trying to rebuild an old project you haven't touched in a while, and it doesn't rebuild with the new version, you're sort of stuck. I think pulling an old version is not the right way to solve for security issues. We should push like notifications that like, hey, this image has vulnerabilities in some other way rather than pulling entire artifacts that build systems depend on.
It's not just security though. It's the way that we package dependencies with Buildpacks. They're tied to specific versions. And those things are external resources that can go away. So like I know on the Java Buildpacks side, there are like upstream projects that we pull in dependencies for that have changed their links to things. And, you know, so there's swaths of old versions of these that are just broken, never will work.
I don't know that does cleaning it up make it better though, you know, like someone pulled their things, we pull ours. I don't, if we're not paying for it, like once we're on Docker Hub, I don't know if I'd want to continue to delete things. Like I think there's a question about what to do with the GCR stuff that we are paying for, whether we migrate it or not. But I guess I'm hesitant to set up a policy of continued deletion once we're in a place where we don't have that monetary constraint.
I would say that there are still other concerns. I mean, from a user perspective, you want things to be consistent. And so if we just decide like at this point in time, we're not going to move that stuff forward from from GCR, that's less predictable for users. You know, at some point in the future, we might have to make a similar decision if say Docker Hub starts to want to limit what we store. And, you know, things are not predictable then for users. If we can establish predictable rules, that gives, you know, consistency and sets expectations. I would say the other thing too is not just cost, but there are also storage and, you know, energy concerns with just leaving the world out there forever. You know, so those are things that we should probably strive to be, you know, aware of as well when we try to set policies like this.
Some of these, from what I'm hearing, are also limitations of GCR, right? Docker Hub has like retention policies you can set so that if no one has access to your image for a while, it just cleans it up automatically. I think it's 6 months or something. If no one accesses an image for 6 months, it just gets cleaned up. So it also very much depends on the registry, right?
There's a big kerfuffle where they're going to try to force those policies on everyone and then backed off. But I think they're at least building tooling so you could have usage-based retention.
In worst case, you don't like that. You just have a cron script that runs every month or so that Docker Hub never deletes it. But yeah.
I wonder if to a certain extent, like the Buildpack registry, like registry search API does some version of that, right? One thing about to keep in mind is if we delete images, we should go yank the Buildpacks from the Buildpack registry.
It's gonna be hard. I mean, we'll probably need something on the registry side that checks if the image with that digest is available or not, and then yanks it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be nice to maybe not totally remove it from the registry, but just have it as like a archived or, you know, or some special state.
On the Buildpack registry, there is one called yanked. Like you cannot
Okay.
remove a Buildpack. All you do is send yanked to true.
Okay.
But I don't think you can set it back to false, where I mean, you could if we invented a way for you to do that. I don't think there's any workflow for doing that. So if you accidentally, you know, if we did Sam's idea where you're automatically yanking things that don't exist, then there'd be no opportunity to fix it by pushing it back up there.
I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's a Git repository. You can...
Yeah, anything can be done if we really want it to be, right?
Yes, I thought this one might be a little contentious. There's a number of, I think, ways we could do this. So there's, you know, if you have feedback, definitely drop comments and I think we can maybe continue discussion.
Yeah, sounds like we're not going to solve it now. This one I'm
Right.
not fully convinced that if we don't have a forcing function, but we'll come back to it. I see your points for sure. Up next, Datadog support for Java.
Yep, so this is just a new build pack that we'd like to introduce. Primary target is for Java, but I think we're also going to be able to drop in some Node.js support as well. I just need to talk with someone that's more familiar with Node.js to make sure I'm not totally doing something weird with it. Yeah, we're hoping to have this ready here pretty soon.
I don't know, I'll make it as far in my approvals, but I'll try to take a look at this shortly. And this is the one we were talking about earlier, to rename Open Liberty Buildpack.
Yeah. So when we initially created the build pack, it was primarily focused on Open Liberty. And since then, we've added some support for Web3 Liberty, making the name kind of misrepresent what the build pack does. And so this is just an RFC to rename it to just Liberty so that it more accurately represents what it's doing. And obviously, we'd like to get this done before we do anything with adding it to the composite build pack so that, we don't have to worry about renaming things there as well.
Seems uncontroversial. I'll try to approve this for this meeting. Great. That was our RFCs. I'm glad we did a really good job getting it done in 10 minutes, 40, 10, it's all the same thing, right? But I think this is the most RFCs we've had like actively going in a really long time. So it's kind of cool to see how much activity is happening on the project, even if this 10-minute marker is feeling a little out of date now. Okay, libcmb v2 updates and questions. I'm going to kick that to Dan or Sam or both.
I had a couple questions I was supposed to raise on Friday's meeting, and we didn't get to the point to cover them, so I will have to table that for the next one. Sam, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I didn't put it in there.
Oh, we just
This
have
is
a
in our
reoccurring.
standing
okay.
items. Like,
Okay.
do we want this to be a standing item? Do we need to leave it for now?
Honestly, could probably be like an every other week standing item because we do this meeting weekly and the CNB week meeting is every other week. And so the off weeks, there's really nothing to discuss.
Okay, well, we don't have the
Yeah.
other wasting item, so I'm not going to do that right now. Project update. I've always been confused by this one since it came in. I don't know what project update is. I'm sorry, guys. What is project update?
I think it mostly is we've failed to actually add sub-bullet items to the section when we show up at the beginning. The point here is for us to just provide some background update on like what are the things that are actively getting worked on at the moment. So I don't know, I'll leave it up to the folks who are actively working on stuff. I know there's stuff going on, so folks chime in with what you're working on.
We are currently we are still in the process of adding the new SBOM format to coincide with the previously legacy SBOM format into Node.js. There's a bunch of PRs open right now that are being reviewed, and we'll hopefully have support for the previous label implementation as well as the brand new layer implementation. So that's cooking as we speak.
We are also in the process of working on a PHP build pack rewrite. So we're going to be reorganizing and restructuring all the build packs in that language family, and then also rewriting anything that isn't written in Packet to use Packet. So they'll be a little bit more in line with the non-Java Paketo build packs. So I can post a link to the related issue if anybody is interested and wants to follow along with our progress.
We added 2 new build packs on the Java side. There is Java Memory Assistant and JAttach, which are different tools. These are from an RFC that we wrapping up an RFC that I think it was 3 or 4 on the Java Buildpacks RFCs. JAttach is a tool that you can use to connect to the running JVM. It is the same implementation as JCMD, but that's only available in a JDK. So this just helps you get access to that stuff. And then Memory Assistant is like a scheduler you can use to have heap dumps generated on different intervals.
Y'all would like a quick read on that. The blog post that was originally announcing these to be as features to come has been updated to say that they are features that exist. I will link that blog post in the note.
Yeah, thanks Forrest for pushing that one through.
Sounds like that's it for project updates. Thanks for sharing, everybody. And last but not least on our agenda, SBOM updates. Sam.
I was just curious, like if there's some common issue that tracks the implementation status of an RFC. I know like there are lots of Buildpacks in the Paketo project, and like RFCs that impact almost all of them, like the SBOM one. It's really hard to track the progress of like how each Buildpack is doing and like what they're blocked on, or if there's anything we can help in terms of like the upstream Buildpacks project that you can unlock your own or things like that. So
there is these issues in the RFC repo. I don't know if you can still see my screen. I don't think we have one for everything that we should, maybe like this SBOM work has changed a lot. I think of all the initiatives we've gone through, this has gone through the most churn while in flight. So I think the last like RFC we approved for SBOM is talking about a label format that maybe doesn't exist anymore. Like, although I don't know if everyone switched it over to talk about SIFT and Cyclone while I was out, but there's some chance that we need to update with what we're actually doing here as we've adapted to the direction in CMD. We probably need to add an issue to track that. But in general, there are some issues that are tracking cross-cutting things in the RFC repo and checkboxes that people check as they go through.
gotcha. Those the ones that I'm most interested in are Go and Node. I already got an update for Node, so just curious about Go.
I think the answer is not done yet.
Yeah, but like very, very close. For us, the blocking factor was the pack release this last week. We basically wanted first class support in Occam in order to like actually pull the SBOMs we are generating out of the build context and the run image and so on and so forth, in order to validate that we're generating the correct SBOMs with the contents we expected. Now that that's done, that addition has been made to Occam and those things are nominally unblocked. It's really just a matter of like how quickly can we get those changes into the build packs we need and get it out the door. So nothing blocking us right now. We're just, our priority was Node first and Go is immediately after that. So we're just gonna keep trucking.
Yeah, we FYI for Node, SIFT generates a huge SBOM. So at least like for some of our stuff, it caused some issues. Like not in the output image, but the tools that we're trying to inspect it and download it or display it in some UI or something. Just FYI.
All right, I think that's a wrap. Unless anyone has any late breaking topics.
The only other thing I'd like to point out, but I don't know if Paketo is already using it, but in one of the recent SIFT updates, we added the ability to output multiple formats in a single call. So you don't have to rerun the entire scanner multiple times to get multiple outputs. So if you want to generate both SIFT, CycloneDX, and SPDX at the same time, instead of waiting 3 times the amount of time, you can just do it in like 1/3 the time or whatever. So if I know Libpack currently makes multiple calls, I don't know about Packet.
We updated the pack last week, I think.
Okay.
And Packet always did just, it generates into SIFT and then it cross converts into CycloneDX and SPDX. So it's always only ever done one scan.
How do you cross convert?
Basically, the SIFT library, if you're using it directly, there's like an intermediate SIFT like object format, and then from there you have choices of formatters, and you can like format into SIFT, format into CycloneDX, and format into SPDX. So we do like the scan to produce that intermediate format, and then we just format into the file formats from that same intermediate type.
So you're still using SIFT stuff then? Cool.
Yes.
All right, folks. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you all have a lovely day.